I always thought I knew what it meant to love someone, but nothing could prepare me for the moment when Claire Donovan asked me to make the ultimate sacrifice to silence the life support keeping her mother alive. The oxygen machine had been buzzing for days, keeping Madame alive on a threadbare pulse. I hadn't agreed to do it immediately. At first, it was just a suggestion, a soft plea wrapped in sweetness that dripped from her lips like honey. She didn't mean it, or so I convinced myself. But as the days dragged on, Claire's voice grew more insistent. "Just pull the plug, Damien," she'd say, her fingers tracing the rim of her wine glass as if it were the most casual request in the world. "I want her gone. I want everything to be mine." Her eyes, dark and filled with an ambition that didn't belong in her delicate frame, burned into mine. And I, foolishly, allowed myself to be charmed. In the beginning, Claire was everything I thought I wanted. Beautiful, charming, and powerful. She stood at the top of every room she entered, and people flocked to her. But with time, I realized how much darker her desires ran. She didn't care for the world as most people did. She only wanted to control it, bend it to her will. The first time she spoke about her mother in such a cold, calculating tone, I told myself she was just venting, just letting out her frustrations. After all, her mother had been a tyrant, controlling Claire's every move, even well into adulthood. The first time I considered her words seriously was the night Claire cried, her face buried in her hands. She told me her mother had been nothing but a tool, a burden. "You don't know what it's like, Damien," she whispered, "to be loved by someone who only wants you to be perfect. She's always been a threat, a reminder of my past. I never thought it would come to this." The night Claire finally made her demand, there was no emotion in her eyes, just a cold finality. She stood in front of me, her lips parted with that same sweetness, but there was something else beneath it. "Make her go away," she said simply, almost as if it were a casual request. At first, I froze. My mind raced. Was I really being asked to end a life? But Claire's words echoed in my mind, too loud to ignore. I had known for years how her mother had controlled every facet of her existence. What would one less person standing in her way mean for her? For us? I knew the consequences. I knew it would be irreversible. But something in Claire's gaze, something about the way she made me feel, I wasn't sure anymore. Her hand reached out for mine, fingers cool against my skin. "Do it for me, Damien. I'll make it worth your while. You'll see." And just like that, I was trapped. I agreed, hesitated, and then it was done. In the dead of night, when the silence of the hospital room was thick enough to suffocate, I disconnected the oxygen tube. I watched the numbers on the monitor drop, the beeping slowing until it finally became a flat line. Claire had won. She was free. But as I stood there, trembling, staring at her mother's lifeless body, something inside me broke. It wasn't the fear of being caught. It wasn't the guilt of having taken a life. It was the realization that Claire hadn't been the person I thought she was. She wasn't mad. She wasn't grieving. She was celebrating. The next morning, as I tried to process the events of the night, Claire was already dressed in her usual sharp suit, moving through the house like nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, a smile gracing her lips, as though we hadn't just committed the most unforgivable act. "Thank you, Damien," she said, her voice cool and composed. "Now, we can move forward." Her coldness was suffocating. It didn't matter that I had just destroyed everything to please her. Nothing had changed. It was as if her mother had never existed. Claire wasn't mad. She was relieved. And that realization, how easily she'd moved on from the chaos we'd created, stung worse than any betrayal. A few weeks passed, but the tension between us only grew. Claire didn't speak of her mother, not once. She was too busy with her own ambitions. Her company was growing, and she was climbing higher with every deal, every move she made. But I felt lost, suffocated. I had given up my own soul to make her happy, and now she was more distant than ever. The guilt of what I had done gnawed at me, but it wasn't the kind of guilt that fades. It was sharp, unforgiving. I started to feel trapped, suffocated by the life we had built together. I tried to talk to Claire about it, tried to reason with her, but each time she dismissed my feelings, telling me I was overreacting. "You did it for me," she would say, "so don't make it sound like I owe you anything." Her words felt like knives, cutting deeper with every passing day. It wasn't love anymore, it was control. I was no longer her partner, I was her pawn. And I began to wonder how far would she go to get what she wanted. How much was I willing to sacrifice for her approval? The answer came the night Claire's true nature was revealed. It was at one of her lavish parties, surrounded by people who admired her, people who didn't know the truth. I was standing in the corner, trying to blend into the background, when I overheard a conversation between Claire and her closest confidant, Roger. "Ethan was weak," Claire said, her voice low. "He did what I asked, but he's always been a coward. No one who truly loves me would hesitate." I felt my heart drop. Ethan? Was she talking about her former lover? "Damien's no better," Claire continued. "He's just like all the others, a tool to get what I want, a step on the ladder. That's all they are to me." I felt my blood run cold. It wasn't just that she had manipulated me, it was that she had no respect for me, no respect for anyone. I was just another piece in her game, and when the pieces no longer served their purpose, she discarded them without hesitation. I left that party early, and as I walked through the quiet streets, I realized something profound. I had been living a lie. I wasn't doing this for Claire. I was doing it for me. I was seeking validation in all the wrong places. But now I understood. This wasn't love. This was an obsession, a need for control. And as long as I stayed by her side, I would never be free. But the truth was, I couldn't leave. Not yet. Not while I was still haunted by the memories of the terrible thing I had done for her. And as I walked back to the empty apartment we shared, the questions still lingered in my mind. Could she love anyone other than herself? Would she ever see the damage she'd caused? And most importantly, could I live with what I had become? The days that followed were a blur. I couldn't look at Claire without feeling the weight of what we had done. Her indifference was suffocating, and I started to question everything I'd ever thought I knew about love. I had given up so much for her: my integrity, my values, my sense of self. I had willingly become a part of her twisted game, convinced that somehow I would be rewarded. But now, as I looked at her, I realized there was no reward coming. She didn't even care about the price I had paid. She was still just focused on her empire, her wealth, her control. At night, I lay awake, my thoughts racing. I would close my eyes, and all I could see was my mother, lifeless, her breath gone forever, taken by my own hand. I could hear Claire's voice in my head, always cold, always calculating. I had no idea how to escape the grip of the woman who had orchestrated my downfall. But I knew one thing: I had to break free. Claire continued to climb higher, her business booming, her name on the lips of everyone who mattered. But each time she smiled, each time she congratulated herself on another victory, something in me withered. I realized just how little I mattered to her. She didn't even notice when I withdrew further into myself, when I became more silent, more distant. She was too wrapped up in her own success to notice the damage she was causing. It was in the middle of one of her lavish events, an exclusive gala with all the elite of the city, that I reached my breaking point. Claire was at the center of it all, charming everyone with her grace and beauty, while I stood off to the side, watching from the shadows. It was then that I realized something terrifying. She would never stop, not until she had everything. She would crush anyone who stood in her way, even me. But that night, as I watched her laugh and flirt with every person who came near her, I also saw something else, something I hadn't noticed before. There was a darkness in her eyes, a hunger that went deeper than ambition. She was hollow, empty, just like me. And that was when I knew I wasn't the only one trapped in this twisted dance. I excused myself from the party and left the venue. Stepping out into the cool night air, my mind was spinning. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I walked aimlessly through the streets, not knowing where I was going, just trying to clear my head. But then, in the distance, I saw someone who stopped me in my tracks. It was Alexander West, my former assistant. He had been there for me all these years, but after everything that happened, we'd lost touch. But now, here he was, standing in front of me as if he'd been waiting for me. "Damien," he said softly, his voice carrying a weight I hadn't heard in a long time. "I've been watching. I know what's been going on." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. Alexander hesitated before replying. "I know what Claire is doing to you. I know what she's done to all of us." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean by all of us?" I asked, suddenly afraid of the answer. He stepped closer, his gaze intense. "She's not just using you, Damien. She's using everyone around her, and she won't stop until she's taken everything. But it doesn't have to be that way. His words seemed as simple to easy. How do you know? I asked, skepticism lacing my voice. I've been keeping an eye on her for years. Alexander replied, I know how she works, and I know how to take her down. I stared at him, my mind racing. Could he really help me? Could we really take her down? Or was this just another trap? What do you want from me? I asked, my voice low. I want you to see the truth, Alexander said. I want you to see Claire for what she really is. She's a predator, Damien, and she's using you to get what she wants. But you don't have to be her pawn anymore. His words hit me like a slap in the face. It was true. I had been nothing more than a tool in Claire's hands, used to get what she wanted. But now, there was a chance for something else, a chance for revenge, a chance for justice. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his words settle deep within me. What do I need to do? I asked, determination starting to rise within me. Alexander's eyes gleamed with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. We take Claire down. We expose her. We make her pay for everything she's done. That night, I made a decision. I was no longer willing to live in the shadows of Claire's control. I would take back what was mine, my dignity, my life, and my future. And I would make sure she would never be able to hurt anyone again. The plan was simple, but it wasn't easy. Claire had always been a master manipulator, and it would take everything I had to outsmart her. But now, with Alexander by my side, I felt like I finally had a chance. We spent the next few weeks quietly gathering intel, learning everything we could about her weaknesses, her insecurities, and the people she had under her thumb. And slowly, a plan began to take shape. I spent hours in the dark corners of my apartment, staring at the images of Claire's empire on my laptop. Every move she made, every business deal, every interaction with the people who worshipped her, it all began to reveal the cracks in her armor. I could see the pattern, the delicate threads she used to weave her web of power. But the more I studied her, the more I realized one thing. Claire was afraid. She was afraid of being exposed, of losing control. And that fear, that vulnerability, was our greatest weapon. One evening, as I sat alone in my dimly lit apartment, a message came through on my phone. It was from Alexander. I read the text and felt my heart race. The time is now. It was time to put the plan into motion. We couldn't wait any longer. We couldn't afford to let Claire get any stronger. It was now or never. I met Alexander at the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, the place where we'd decided to launch our final strike. The air was thick with tension as we stood across from each other, silent for a moment. I could see the same resolve in his eyes that I felt burning in my chest. We're doing this, Alexander said, his voice low and steady. I nodded. Let's take her down. The first step was to get Claire's most trusted allies to turn on her. We knew that if we could expose her lies to the people who had stood by her, we could shake the foundation of her empire. And from there, we would build a case against her, one so solid, so undeniable, that she wouldn't be able to escape. The evening went by in a blur. We executed each part of the plan with precision, gathering information, securing key documents, and making sure the right people were in the right place at the right time. Every step was calculated, every move deliberate. By the time I walked into Claire's office the next morning, I felt like a different person. The old me, the one who had cowered in fear, the one who had been manipulated into doing her bidding, was gone. I was no longer the man she had controlled. I was her executioner. And today, she would pay for everything she had done. I could hear the sound of her heels clicking against the polished floor as Claire walked towards me, a smug smile on her face. Good morning, Damien. I trust you've had a restful night? Her voice dripped with the same false sweetness that had always repelled me. But I didn't flinch. I stood tall, meeting her gaze with unwavering resolve. I've been better, I said coldly, my words sharp. Claire raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback. Oh, what's wrong? Did something happen? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I stepped toward her desk, placing a thick stack of files in front of her. The documents contained everything: her corrupt business practices, the backroom deals, the lies she had told to get ahead, and the truth about my mother's death. Claire's eyes flickered as she glanced at the papers, but she quickly regained her composure, her smile returning. What is this, Damien? Are you trying to play some kind of game with me? This isn't a game, Claire. I said, my voice firm. This is the end of everything you've built. The end of your empire. You've been lying, manipulating, and killing for years. And now, it's time for the world to see you for what you really are. Her eyes narrowed. You think you can take me down? You've always been nothing more than a pawn in my game. You're nothing without me. I could feel the anger rising within me, but I kept it in check. This was my moment. This was the moment I would make her face everything she had done. I don't need you anymore, I said quietly, and neither does anyone else. For the first time, I saw fear flicker in her eyes. It was a brief moment, but it was enough. She knew that everything was about to come crashing down. I'll destroy you, Damien, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. You're making a huge mistake. I smiled. I've already won. With that, I turned on my heel and walked out of her office, leaving her to face the truth she had been running from for so long. And as I walked away, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The revenge had been sweet, but the justice that came with it was even sweeter. The next few days were a whirlwind. I couldn't help but feel a mixture of triumph and dread. The files I had left on Claire's desk were just the beginning. Word quickly spread, and soon the media was all over the scandal, tearing into her like a pack of ravenous wolves. She had built her empire on lies, and now the truth was starting to unravel, piece by piece. But the hardest part was still ahead. Claire wasn't going to go down without a fight. And I knew she wouldn't hesitate to make me the scapegoat if she had the chance. I spent the next few days in a haze of sleepless nights and tense meetings, watching as the walls closed in on her. But every time I thought I had her cornered, she would slip through my fingers like water. Claire was ruthless, and she knew how to play the game better than anyone. She had always been the puppet master, and I was just another string she had pulled. But this time, things were different. I had become the puppet master, and I was about to pull the strings in a way she would never see coming. As the investigation into her corruption progressed, I watched her every move. She grew more desperate, more erratic. The smooth facade she had always maintained was cracking, revealing the monster underneath. She was spiraling, and I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. The closer we got to exposing her, the more dangerous she became. I could almost hear her whispering in my ear, taunting me, daring me to make the wrong move. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had nothing left to lose, and she had everything to fear. I arranged a meeting with her, the final confrontation. It would be at her most vulnerable moment, when she thought she had everything under control. I knew she would underestimate me, just like she had done before. But this time, I had the upper hand, and I was going to make sure she paid for everything she had done. When I walked into her office that day, Claire was sitting behind her desk, her usual air of confidence masking the anxiety that was slowly eating away at her. The way she clenched her hands around the armrests, the tightness in her shoulders, it was clear she was unraveling. She wasn't the powerful, untouchable woman she had once been. She was a broken shell, a woman who had realized too late that she had made a terrible enemy. Damien, she said, her voice shaky but still laced with venom. You think you've won? You've only made things worse for yourself. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I walked across the room slowly and deliberately until I was standing right in front of her. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and fury. I'm not afraid of you, Claire, I said, my voice cold. You can't control me anymore. Her lips curled into a twisted smile. You think you've destroyed me? You think you've taken everything from me? You don't know what I'm capable of. I could see the desperation in her eyes, the way her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of her desk. She was trying to hold on to her power, to convince herself that she still had control. But I could see through it. The game was over. You're not the queen you once were, I said quietly. You're nothing but a shadow of your former self. And now, I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth. Claire's eyes flashed with rage, and she stood up, knocking her chair back violently. You think you've won, but you haven't. I will destroy you, Damien. I'll make you regret this. I stepped closer, closing the gap between us. You're already destroyed, and I'm going to make sure the world knows just how far you'll go to protect your secrets. The silence between us was thick with tension, the weight of the moment pressing down on both of us. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, but there was no fear, only determination. And then, without warning, Claire lunged at me. Her hands reached for my throat, fingers like claws. But I was ready. I caught her wrist before she could make contact, twisting it with a force that sent her crashing back into her chair. "You've lost," I said, my voice low and steady. Claire looked up at me, eyes wide with panic. She could see it now. The power she had once held over me was gone, and in its place, there was only the cold, unrelenting force of retribution. I turned and walked toward the door, leaving her to stew in her defeat. But as I reached for the handle, I heard her voice one last time. "You'll regret this, Damien," she hissed. "You don't know what you've done." I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had already won. The following days felt like a slow burn, each moment stretching longer than the last. The weight of what I had done settled heavily on my shoulders, but I didn't regret it, not in the slightest. I had been pushed to the brink, and in the end, I had taken control. Claire was no longer a threat, but the real battle was only just beginning. I watched as her empire crumbled from the sidelines. Her name was dragged through the mud, her reputation shattered by the same people she had once manipulated with ease. The world that had once adored her now turned their backs on her. It felt like sweet justice, but there was an emptiness inside me that I couldn't shake. Claire had been my obsession for so long, the woman who had haunted my every thought. But now that she was gone, I was left to pick up the pieces of my own life. The realization hit me hard. This was the price of revenge. I couldn't escape the memories, the moments when I had trusted her, when I had thought she cared for me. But all those moments had been lies, carefully constructed to keep me under her thumb. She had never loved me. I had been nothing more than a tool for her to use, just like everyone else. But in the end, I was the one who had won. I had taken back my life, my power, and my dignity. Claire was nothing now. She had been reduced to a footnote in my story. The weeks that followed were filled with a kind of numbness. I had no direction, no purpose. Claire's downfall had been satisfying, but it had come at a cost. I found myself struggling to find meaning in a world that felt so empty. The people who had once supported me now turned away, afraid of getting caught in the fallout of my actions. I was alone. I had always been alone. But then came the unexpected. It was a late afternoon when I received a call. I recognized the number immediately. It was Alexander West, the man who had been by my side through it all. He was my closest confidant, the one person I trusted above all others, the one person who knew what I had sacrificed to get here. "Damien." His voice was steady, but I could hear the tension in his words. "We need to talk." I felt a knot form in my stomach. I knew something was coming, something I wasn't prepared for. "What is it, Alexander?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then he spoke again, his voice quiet but urgent. "Ethan Blake is coming after you. He's not done yet." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Ethan Blake, the man who had caused so much pain, so much destruction. I had thought he was finished, that his power was broken, but I was wrong. "He's been digging into your past," Alexander continued. "He's not letting go, and he's planning something big." I stood there, frozen. The walls I had carefully built around myself were crumbling, and I was powerless to stop it. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice shaking for the first time. "In years, you need to act fast," Alexander said. "I have a plan, but you have to trust me. This time, we're going to take him down once and for all." I didn't hesitate. I couldn't afford to. Ethan Blake had made it clear that he wouldn't stop until he had destroyed everything I had worked for. But this time, it wouldn't be him pulling the strings. It would be me. The days that followed were a blur of preparations, secrecy, and deception. Alexander and I worked together, meticulously planning our next move. Every detail had to be perfect. Ethan Blake was ruthless, but he wasn't invincible. And now, we had the upper hand. As the day of our final confrontation approached, the tension in the air was palpable. Every moment felt like it was leading up to something inevitable, something catastrophic. I could feel the storm brewing, and I knew that there was no turning back. Ethan Blake was going to learn what it felt like to lose everything, to be powerless, just like I had once been, and this time, there would be no escape. The night before the confrontation, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with thoughts of everything that had led up to this moment, everything that had happened between me and Ethan. The manipulation, the lies, the deceit. It had all built to this final showdown. And as much as I had planned for it, nothing could truly prepare me for what was about to unfold. The plan was simple: expose Ethan for the fraud he was, and dismantle everything he had spent years building. But even with the best plan, I knew things rarely went as expected. Claire had underestimated me, and now Ethan would too. The next morning, I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that would reflect the power I had worked so hard to reclaim. It was a suit that screamed confidence, authority, and control. I needed to remind myself that I was no longer the person I used to be, no longer the victim. I was in charge now. I had taken my life back, and Ethan Blake was going to pay. I met Alexander at a quiet cafe just before the event. The air between us was heavy with anticipation. We had both put our lives on the line to get to this point, and now it was time to finish what we had started. "Are you ready?" Alexander asked, his voice calm but filled with the weight of what was to come. I nodded. I've never been more ready in my life. We exchanged no more words, but the silence was enough. We both knew what needed to be done. As I stood to leave, I felt a surge of adrenaline course through my veins. This was it, the moment that would change everything. The gala was being held at one of the most prestigious venues in the city, the top floor of a skyscraper that overlooked the entire skyline. It was where the wealthy and powerful gathered, a place where deals were made and lives were shattered. And tonight, it was going to be where Ethan Blake's empire came crashing down. When I arrived, I was met with the usual flurry of glances, whispers, shocked expressions. I hadn't been to one of these events in years, and my return was sure to raise more than a few eyebrows. But I didn't care. I wasn't here for their approval. I was here to take Ethan down. I made my way through the crowded room, my steps deliberate, my gaze cold. I could feel the eyes of the room on me, but I refused to let them see my fear. Ethan had tried to break me, but here I was, standing, stronger than ever. His game was over. Ethan spotted me from across the room. His eyes locked on mine, and for a brief moment, I saw something in his gaze, something I had never seen before. Fear. It was fleeting, but it was there. I could see the doubt creeping into his mind, the realization that maybe, just maybe, he had underestimated me. He made his way toward me, his usual swagger faltering for the first time. The crowd parted as he approached, his every step calculated. But I stood my ground, refusing to let him intimidate me any longer. This was my moment, and I wasn't going to let him take it from me. "You look different," Ethan said, his voice smooth but lacking the confidence it once had. "I've changed," I replied, my tone steady. "And so have you," he smirked, but there was no amusement in it. "You think you've won? You think you can take everything from me?" I didn't answer. There was no need to. He knew the truth. He knew what was coming. Just then, Alexander appeared beside me, a silent figure in the shadows. He didn't need to say a word. His presence alone was enough to remind Ethan that he was no longer in control. "I don't think you understand the gravity of the situation, Ethan," Alexander said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made the room fall silent. "The game has changed. You've been outplayed." Ethan's jaw clenched, his anger barely contained. "This is my world, and you're just living in it. I don't lose. You already have," I said, my voice cutting through the tension in the air. "You lost the moment you underestimated me." The crowd was hanging on every word, the suspense building with every second that passed. I could feel the power in the room shifting. Ethan had been the king of his empire, but now it was crumbling around him, piece by piece. Suddenly, a video flashed on the screen behind us. It was a compilation of everything Ethan had tried to hide: his corruption, his lies, his manipulation. His empire was built on deceit, and now the truth was out for everyone to see. The crowd gasped in shock as the images played out, but I wasn't looking at them. My eyes were fixed on Ethan, watching his face contort with fury as he realized that his world was collapsing in front of him. "You can't do this," he hissed, taking a step toward me. But Alexander was already in his path, a silent warning in his eyes. "You were warned, Ethan," Alexander said coldly. "And now it's over." For a moment, there was silence. Then the whispers started, the murmurs of disbelief filling the room. Ethan Blake, the man who had once been untouchable, was now nothing more than a fraud, exposed for the world to see. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. With a steady hand, I pulled out a document from my bag and placed it on the table in front of Ethan. It was the final blow, the last nail in his coffin. The evidence of his crimes, signed and sealed, ready to be presented to the authorities. His downfall had been meticulously planned, and now the world would know the truth. Ethan's face went pale as he stared down at the document. The weight of his actions finally seemed to hit him, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't anger or arrogance. It was fear. "You're done," I said quietly, my voice unwavering. "You're finished." He didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked away, his shoulders hunched in defeat. The man who had once ruled with an iron fist was now nothing more than a broken shell, a shadow of his former self. I stood there for a moment, watching him leave, before turning to the crowd. They were all watching me now, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. I had won. I had taken back everything Ethan had tried to take from me, and in the process, I had reclaimed my life. The battle was over, but the war, that was just beginning. The applause was deafening. It echoed through the hall, a cacophony of admiration and disbelief. But as I stood there, soaking in the victory, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The sense of justice I'd expected to feel didn't come in the way I thought it would. Ethan Blake's downfall was inevitable, but in the aftermath, I was left with an emptiness that even the applause couldn't fill. As the crowd continued to murmur and disperse, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Alexander, his expression as calm and composed as ever, but there was something in his eyes, an unspoken understanding. "You did it," he said, his voice steady, but tinged with something deeper. "He'll never recover from this." I nodded, but I couldn't bring myself to smile. "He'll never be the man he was, but I'm not sure that's enough." Alexander raised an eyebrow, clearly puzzled. "You've won, Ava. What else do you want?" I shook my head. "I don't know. Maybe I want to see him truly understand the weight of what he did, to see him lose everything he fought for, not just once, but over and over, to feel the weight of his mistakes, of his cruelty, on his own skin." Alexander's gaze softened, but there was a flicker of something dark behind his eyes. "You're not done with him, are you?" I met his gaze with a calmness I hadn't felt in years. "No, not yet." The rest of the night blurred into a haze of people congratulating me, reporters asking for interviews, and business tycoons offering me deals. But despite the accolades, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in the pit of my stomach. Ethan's fall had been a beautiful spectacle, a carefully orchestrated unraveling of his empire. But in the silence that followed, it felt like a hollow victory. His defeat wasn't enough, it needed to be personal. It needed to hurt. As the gala ended and the last of the guests trickled out of the building, I found myself standing alone at the balcony, staring out at the city below. The lights twinkled in the distance, a reminder of all the power, all the wealth that people like Ethan had once wielded. But now, it was all in my hands. I had reclaimed my life, my future, my dignity. And yet, the emptiness lingered. "You're thinking too much." Alexander's voice broke through my thoughts. "He's gone. What are you going to do now?" I turned to face him, his presence a constant in the storm of my emotions. "I don't know yet, but I do know one thing. I've spent my entire life trying to please people, trying to make up for my mistakes, trying to make sure everyone else was happy. Ethan Blake is the product of that, of my failures. But no more. I'm done." Alexander took a step closer, his hand brushing against mine. "You've always been strong, Ava, but now, you're more than that. You're unstoppable." I looked at him, my heart heavy with the weight of everything that had led up to this moment. "Maybe, but I need to be sure. I need to know that what I'm doing is right." "You're doing it for yourself," Alexander said, his voice firm. "You don't need anyone's approval anymore. Not Ethan's, not anyone's." For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to breathe, to release the tension that had been building in my chest. Alexander was right. It wasn't about Ethan anymore. It wasn't about anyone else. It was about me. I turned back to the city, feeling the cool night air against my skin. Then it's time to move on, to take what's mine. The Sinclair legacy belongs to me now, not Ethan, not anyone else. And just like that, the plan shifted. It was no longer about revenge, it was about reclamation. It was about building something new, something that would stand as a testament to my strength, my survival. Ethan Blake had thought he could break me, but he had underestimated the depths of my resilience. "I'll take it all," I said quietly, almost to myself. "Everything. I'll make him watch as I build something he could never dream of." Alexander stepped up beside me, a silent ally in this new chapter. Whatever it takes. The city below was bathed in light, its towering structures a symbol of everything that had been taken from me and everything I was about to reclaim. The Sinclair name would no longer be a symbol of power and oppression. It would be a symbol of rebirth. And as the night wore on, I knew one thing for sure: this was just the beginning. Ethan Blake's world had already crumbled. But now, it was my turn to rise, and I would do so in a way that would make every single person who had ever doubted me wish they had never crossed my path. I smiled to myself, the future clear before me. It was mine for the taking, and no one, not Ethan, not anyone, could stand in my way. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity, but beneath the surface, I felt a calmness I hadn't experienced in years. The day I took control of Sinclair Industries, standing before the board with a quiet confidence, I felt the power of every decision I'd ever made coming full circle. Every move I had made, every sacrifice, every ounce of pain had led to this moment. Ethan Blake had built his empire on the backs of others, on manipulation and lies, but now it was mine. Alexander had been my rock, always a step ahead of me, anticipating my every move. I knew he would be there to support me through the hardest times. I trusted him with everything: my plans, my thoughts, and my darkest secrets. But in the back of my mind, there was still one question I couldn't shake. Why had he stuck with me all these years? I knew his loyalty had nothing to do with money or power. It ran deeper, more personal than that. I had saved him once, when his career had nearly crumbled under the weight of a single mistake. But I had never asked him why he had chosen to stay by my side. Not just as an employee, but as someone who had stood with me through the darkest chapters of my life. That night, after the meeting, I found myself sitting alone in the office, staring at the city lights outside. The world had changed. It felt different now, lighter almost, as if I could breathe again. But there was still a sense of unease. Ethan Blake had disappeared from my life for good, but his shadow lingered, haunting me with the memories of everything he had taken from me. The door opened behind me, and I didn't need to look up to know who it was. Alexander's presence had become as familiar as my own. "It's done," he said, his voice calm but with a hint of something more beneath the surface. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. The weight of the victory, the relief, and the deep sense of satisfaction washed over me. "It's done," I whispered, finally looking up to meet his gaze. There was something in his eyes, something I couldn't quite place. I had known him for so long, and yet there were times when I still felt like I didn't fully understand him. "What's next?" he asked, stepping closer to me. I stood slowly, feeling the shift in the room. My heart was pounding in my chest, but it wasn't fear. It was something else entirely. Power, control, and the overwhelming sense that I was finally the one holding all the cards. "Now, we make sure no one ever forgets who I am," I said, my voice steady, the edge of my past life falling away. "We take this company, and we make it unbreakable. And when we're done with that, we move on to the next chapter." Alexander raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "The next chapter?" I met his gaze, a smile tugging at the corners of my lips. "The Sinclair name won't just live on through this company. It will live on through me, and through you." He didn't reply right away, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes and understanding. He knew what I was asking of him, and he knew that this wasn't just about business anymore. This was about taking back everything I'd lost and making sure no one would ever dare cross me again. The tension between us was palpable, thick in the air, but it was different now. It wasn't just about business. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about something deeper, something neither of us had fully acknowledged until now. "You know I'll follow you anywhere," Alexander said softly, his voice low, the words almost a whisper. "But what if? What if we're not done yet?" I frowned, confused by his sudden shift in tone. "What do you mean?" Alexander took a deep breath, stepping closer. His presence was overwhelming, and for the first time, I noticed the subtle tension in his posture. What if everything we've done so far? What if it was only the beginning? I blinked, my heart skipping a beat. What was he trying to say? "What are you talking about?" He smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile I was used to. This one was full of mystery, full of something darker. What if this empire we've built, this victory, isn't enough? What if you could have everything, not just the power, but the world at your feet? What if I told you there was more to this game than you've seen so far? The world outside seemed to fade as his words sank in. He wasn't talking about the company anymore. He wasn't talking about Ethan or even Sinclair Industries. He was talking about something far bigger, something that could change everything. "You're not just playing to win," he said, his voice quiet, his gaze fixed on mine. "You're playing to dominate." My breath caught in my throat. Was that what I was doing? Was that what I had become? A woman bent on domination, driven by revenge and the need to prove everyone wrong? But then I realized something. That was exactly what I needed to be. Ethan Blake had built his empire on the back of others' pain, and now it was my turn. I wasn't going to just win. I was going to conquer. "And what about you?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. "What's your part in all of this?" He stepped closer, his breath warm against my ear. "I'm not going anywhere, Ava. Not until we finish what we've started." For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a victim. I didn't feel weak, broken, or lost. I felt powerful, unstoppable, and ready to take on the world. But there was one thing I had to do before I could move forward. I had to face Ethan one last time. And this time, I wasn't going to just beat him. I was going to make him regret every decision he'd ever made. "You're right," I said softly, my eyes meeting his. "We're not done yet, but this time, it's personal." He smiled, his eyes darkening with approval. "Let's finish this then." And with that, I knew that everything had changed. My journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. As the days passed, my newfound strength seemed to grow by the hour. Each decision I made, each move I took, felt more decisive, more calculated. It was as if a new persona had emerged from the ruins of my past, one far stronger than I ever imagined possible. I had long been told that I was the product of my environment, that I was a victim of circumstance, that my past would haunt me forever. But no one had seen the woman I was becoming. No one had seen the woman Ethan had helped create unwillingly, perhaps, but with every cruel action, he had shaped me into someone powerful. Alexander had been a constant support, but lately, there was something different in the air between us. It wasn't just loyalty anymore. It was something darker. He seemed to sense the transformation within me, and I could see in his eyes that he was ready to follow me wherever I went, no matter the cost. But was it just his loyalty? Or was there something more? As we prepared for the next steps, the next phase of our plans, a new level of tension crept in. Ethan, in his desperation to keep his empire intact, had begun retaliating with everything he had. He thought he could break me, but in reality, every attack he launched only made me stronger. Every lie he spread, every smear campaign he started, only pushed me closer to the edge where I could finally look down and see the abyss waiting for me. I knew Ethan would come for me. I knew he would try to crush me under the weight of his power, his resources, and his ruthless ambition. But what he didn't know was that I had already stepped into the game with a winning hand. I had learned everything I needed to know about him, his weaknesses, and the cracks in his perfect facade. One evening, as I sat in my office reviewing the final details for our upcoming media blitz, Alexander walked in with a look on his face that I couldn't quite place. Something was different. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low, almost urgent. I raised an eyebrow, my mind racing through possibilities. "What is it?" "It's about Ethan. He's pushing harder than we thought. He's making moves against you, behind your back. We need to stay one step ahead," Alexander said, his gaze intense, focused. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a thrill of adrenaline rush through me. "I've been waiting for this," I replied, a smile tugging at my lips. "Let him push. I'm ready to push back harder." But deep down, I knew that this was the beginning of the end. The moment Ethan realized that he couldn't break me was the moment he would stop playing nice. He would go for the jugular, and I had to be prepared. As the days turned into weeks, I kept pushing, but I could feel the storm brewing on the horizon. The media, once under my control, had started to shift in Ethan's favor. Articles, interviews, even social media posts, everything seemed to be swinging in his direction. People were starting to question my motives, my methods, my past. But I was used to being questioned. I had always been the one who had to prove myself, who had to work twice as hard to get half the respect. And now it was my turn to turn the tables. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into this war. I had become someone much colder, much more calculating. Ethan Blake had underestimated me. He thought he could bury me under his empire of lies. But I had a weapon he didn't truth, and I would use it to tear him apart. One night, as I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection, I realized just how far I had come. The woman who had been broken by betrayal, the woman who had once cried for the life she lost, was gone. In her place was a force to be reckoned with. Ethan might have taken my sight, but he had made the mistake of giving me something far more dangerous. He had given me the desire for revenge. Tonight, it all ends, I muttered to myself, the words hanging in the air like a promise. The plan was set in motion. The media would be the first domino to fall. I would expose every secret, every lie, every betrayal. I would make sure that the world knew who Ethan Blake really was, a man built on the suffering of others, a man who couldn't see the truth even when it was staring him in the face. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was personal. Ethan had taken everything from me, my mother, my dignity, my life. And now, I was going to take it all back. As I prepared to unleash the storm, I knew one thing for sure: Ethan Blake would never see it coming. With every move I made, with every piece of the puzzle that fell into place, I could feel the walls closing in on Ethan. He had built his empire on a foundation of lies, manipulation, and destruction. But I wasn't going to bring him down with brute force. No, I would be far more calculated, more patient. Every step I took had been measured. Every decision had been planned. This was my revenge, and it was going to be slow, methodical, and devastating. The gala was the perfect opportunity. Ethan Blake had been riding high on the waves of his so-called success, and his arrogance was now at its peak. But what he didn't know was that this night would be the turning point, the moment he realized that everything he thought he owned was about to be ripped from his grasp. The venue was grand, the lights dazzling, the guests swarming like bees to honey. Everyone was celebrating Ethan's supposed triumphs, praising his ability to manipulate, to conquer. The perfect show for his ego, the perfect stage for my revenge. I moved through the crowd like a shadow, unnoticed by the unworthy, my mind focused solely on the goal. It had to be flawless. One slip up, one wrong move, and everything would fall apart. And there he was, sitting at the center of it all, the king of his domain. Ethan Blake, the man who had once held me in his arms, made promises he never intended to keep. The man who had crushed me under the weight of his ambition and deceit. The man who thought he could destroy me. I walked toward him, every step deliberate, every movement controlled. He didn't see me coming. His back was to me as I approached, his attention diverted by the adoring crowd around him. His eyes sparkled with the same arrogance I had once fallen for, but now I only saw weakness. I wasn't the naive woman I used to be. I had learned from him, learned how to manipulate, how to control. And now, I would use that knowledge against him. When I finally reached him, I stood there for a moment, watching him, savoring the satisfaction of knowing that he had no idea what was coming. "Ethan," I said, my voice steady and cold, cutting through the noise of the room like a knife. He turned, a look of surprise flashing across his face before it was replaced by his usual smug smile. "AVIs," he greeted me, his tone dripping with feigned warmth. "I didn't expect to see you here. Enjoying the show?" "I'm not here for the show," I replied, my eyes locked onto his. "I'm here for something much more important." His smile faltered for just a moment before he regained his composure. He reached out, as if to take my hand, but I stepped back, not wanting his touch to contaminate me any longer. "What do you want, AVIs?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're late to the party. I've already won." "I don't think so," I said, the words laced with venom. "You see, Ethan, this is where it all ends for you." Before he could respond, I motioned to Alexander, who had been watching from the sidelines. He moved swiftly, discreetly, his presence barely noticed by the other guests. I knew what he had prepared, what he had set in motion. The final piece of the puzzle was about to fall into place. The room went silent as the screens around the venue flickered to life. One by one, images of Ethan's past, his lies, his manipulation, and his betrayals flashed across the massive screens. The audience gasped as they saw Ethan's darkest secrets laid bare for all to see. His mother's death, the false claims he had made, the countless lives he had destroyed in his quest for power. It was all there, exposed in front of everyone. Ethan's face turned pale as he realized what was happening. His eyes widened in horror, but he was trapped. There was nowhere for him to run, no one left to manipulate. His empire, his carefully constructed image, was crumbling before his eyes. "This isn't over," he muttered, his voice shaking with fear and desperation. "Oh, but it is," I said, stepping forward, my gaze unyielding. "This is the moment you finally pay for everything you've done." The audience had fallen into stunned silence, their eyes darting between Ethan and the screens, trying to process what they were seeing. Some were whispering, others were frozen in place, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that Ethan Blake's empire had fallen. The man who had once been untouchable, invincible, was now exposed for the world to see. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I walked up to Ethan, standing tall and unflinching as he trembled before me. "You thought you could destroy me," I said, my voice steady, filled with the strength I had gained. "But you made one fatal mistake. You underestimated me." He opened his mouth to speak, but I silenced him with a single gesture. The room was quiet, the air thick with anticipation. The weight of the moment pressed down on us, and I knew that this was the end of his reign. "You see, Ethan," I continued, my eyes boring into his, "I've always been more than just a pawn in your game. I've always been the queen, the one who moves in silence, in shadows. And now, you'll feel the consequences of your actions." With that, I turned and walked away from him, leaving him standing there, defeated, broken. As I made my way to the exit, I could hear the whispers, the murmurs, the questions of what would happen next. But I didn't care. I had won. Ethan Blake had lost everything. His reputation, his power, his empire, all of it was gone. And in the end, it wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was mine, about taking back control of my life, my destiny. I had turned the tables, and now I was free. As I stepped into the night, I could feel the weight lift off my shoulders. The darkness that had once consumed me was finally gone. I had won, not just for myself, but for everyone who had ever been crushed under Ethan Blake's boot. The game was over, and I had come out on top.